There are prisons designed to punish, prisons designed to contain, and then there is a prison designed to erase you. Behind layers of concrete, steel, and silence, there is a place where time stretches, identities fade, and fear becomes routine. A prison so secure that escape is almost unthinkable, so secretive that most people only know its name from headlines, never its reality. This is not a prison for rehabilitation. This is not a prison for second chances. This is a prison built for those the state considers too dangerous to exist anywhere else. Inside its walls are men accused of terrorism, mass violence, organized crime, and acts that shook an entire nation. Some are convicted. Some are still waiting for trial. All are treated as if the worst has already been proven. Here, guilt is not always the requirement. Risk is. Cells are small. Conversations are monitored. Movement is controlled down to the minute. Even the guards work under constant pressure, trained to expect violence, manipulation, and sudden chaos at any moment. Every door that closes echoes with finality. Every corridor is watched. Every mistake could cost a life. This prison does not rely on brutality to break people. It relies on isolation, on uncertainty, on the slow psychological weight of knowing the outside world is moving on without you. Some inmates spend years inside without ever seeing the sky freely. Others are locked down for 23 hours a day, left alone with their thoughts, regrets, and fears. For many, the mental toll becomes worse than the sentence itself. And yet, this prison is rarely discussed in full. What really happens inside its high-security wings? How are inmates classified as too dangerous? What rules govern daily life when security overrides humanity? And what does long-term confinement here do to the human mind? Tonight, we are going beyond the headlines, beyond the myths, beyond the carefully managed public image. This documentary takes you inside Britain's most feared prison to expose how it operates, who it holds, and why once you enter, nothing about you leaves unchanged. Because for the people locked inside these walls, punishment is only the beginning. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. Belmarsh Prison was never meant to be just another prison. From the very beginning, it was designed as a statement, not only to criminals, but to the public, the courts, and the state itself. A message carved in reinforced concrete and steel. This is where Britain sends the people it fears the most. Located in southeast London, Belmarsh does not look dramatic from a distance. There are no medieval towers, no Gothic walls meant to intimidate passers-by. Instead, it presents itself with modern austerity, clean lines, high fencing, surveillance towers, and a sense of institutional finality. This is intentional. Belmarsh is not about spectacle. It is about control. The prison opened in 1991, replacing the aging Victorian-era jails that had become symbols of decay and dysfunction. But Belmarsh was not just a replacement. It was an upgrade in philosophy. Where older prisons relied on visible force and physical punishment, Belmarsh was built around containment, classification, and psychological management. It is officially classified as a Category A prison, the highest security level in the British system. This category is reserved for inmates whose escape would pose a serious threat to national security or public safety. These are not simply violent offenders. They are individuals the state believes must not escape under any circumstances. And unlike most high-security prisons, Belmarsh does not hold a single type of inmate. Inside its walls are convicted murderers, suspected terrorists, organized crime figures, high-profile defendants awaiting trial, and prisoners transferred from other facilities after being deemed too disruptive or dangerous to manage elsewhere. This mixture is not accidental. It reflects Belmarsh's core role: containment of risk, not rehabilitation. To understand Belmarsh, you must first understand how Britain defines danger. In the British prison system, danger is not measured solely by past crimes. It is assessed through intelligence reports, behavioral evaluations, psychological profiles, and security briefings that most inmates never see. A prisoner can be labeled high risk not only for what they have done, but for what authorities believe they might do. This classification affects everything: where you are housed, how often you leave your cell, who you are allowed to speak to, whether you can work, study, or socialize, even how frequently you are searched. At Belmarsh, security is layered. There is no single barrier that keeps inmates in. Instead, there are systems within systems. Electronic doors controlled remotely. Segmented wings that prevent movement between groups. Constant CCTV coverage monitored from control rooms that never sleep. Officers trained to expect deception, manipulation, and sudden violence as part of the job. Every routine is calculated. Movement times are staggered to prevent large groups from forming. Exercise yards are enclosed and monitored. Meals are delivered with precision. Even silence is enforced, not through shouting or physical punishment, but through structure. When people are kept apart long enough, communication fades on its own. For many inmates, the shock of Belmarsh is not the physical conditions. It is the immediate loss of autonomy. In lower security prisons, inmates learn informal rules. They know when to talk, when to keep quiet, how to navigate social hierarchies. At Belmarsh, those rules collapse. The environment is deliberately unstable. Transfers happen without warning. Cellmates change suddenly. Entire wings can be locked down for hours or days due to intelligence alerts. This unpredictability is not a flaw. It is a feature. Psychologists and security planners have long understood that uncertainty weakens resistance. When people cannot anticipate their environment, they stop planning long-term. They become reactive. Compliance becomes easier. For inmates arriving at Belmarsh for the first time, the intake process reinforces this reality immediately. Upon arrival, prisoners are searched thoroughly, not just for contraband, but for anything that could be used for communication, self-harm, or manipulation. Clothing is inspected. Property is cataloged. Personal items are restricted. The goal is to reduce the individual to what the institution can manage. Cells are functional, not brutal. A bed, a toilet, a small desk, a window designed to allow light but restrict visibility. Nothing about the cell invites comfort, but nothing appears overtly cruel. This ambiguity is important. Belmarsh does not want to be accused of brutality. It wants to appear reasonable, but reasonableness does not soften the psychological impact. For prisoners held on remand, those awaiting trial, the experience can be particularly destabilizing. Unlike convicted inmates, they have not yet been sentenced. In theory, they are innocent until proven guilty. In practice, they are treated as threats first and legal subjects second. Some spend months, even years, inside Belmarsh without knowing when their case will conclude. Court delays, legal appeals, and national security classifications can stretch uncertainty indefinitely. Time becomes abstract. Days blur together. The future shrinks. For those convicted and sentenced, Belmarsh often represents the beginning of the hardest phase of their incarceration. Many are transferred in after violent incidents elsewhere. Others are placed there due to notoriety or intelligence, suggesting they could influence or radicalize other inmates. The prison's reputation spreads quickly among inmates across the UK. Belmarsh is known as a place where privileges disappear, where mistakes are punished swiftly, and where the margin for error is almost non-existent. Even seasoned offenders often describe it as mentally exhausting rather than physically harsh. And then there are the staff. Working at Belmarsh is unlike working at most prisons. Officers are not only guards. They are security operatives operating within a domestic intelligence environment. They receive briefings on inmate affiliations, ideological backgrounds, and potential threats. Many develop a hypervigilant mindset, knowing that complacency could lead to disaster. This pressure takes its toll. Burnout among staff is high. Emotional detachment becomes a survival mechanism. Officers are trained to avoid familiarity, to maintain distance, to treat interactions as transactions rather than relationships. In such an environment, empathy is not encouraged, neutrality is. Yet neutrality itself can feel cold. Over time, the prison becomes a machine where everyone is contained by the system, inmates and staff alike. Rules govern behavior. Surveillance replaces trust. Human interaction is filtered through protocol. Public perception of Belmarsh is shaped largely by the names associated with it. When high-profile inmates are mentioned in the media, the prison becomes shorthand for danger itself. Headlines describe it as Britain's Guantanamo, a comparison that is both misleading and revealing. Misleading because Belmarsh operates under British law, judicial oversight, and formal regulations. revealing because it highlights how fear-driven incarceration can blur ethical boundaries even within democratic systems. Critics argue that Belmarsh represents a shift away from rehabilitation toward preventive detention, that it prioritizes control over reform, that it normalizes long-term psychological stress as an acceptable tool of containment. Supporters counter that Belmarsh is necessary, that it houses individuals who pose extraordinary risks. Belmarsh Prison does not operate on chaos. It operates on classification. Before an inmate truly enters the daily rhythm of Belmarsh, they are studied, sometimes more closely than they have ever been studied in their life. Their crimes matter, but they are only one data point. What matters just as much is how the system believes that person will behave inside a high-security environment. This belief is built through a layered process that blends criminal records, intelligence assessments, psychological evaluations, and behavioral prediction. In Belmarsh, inmates are not simply prisoners. They are risk profiles. Every new arrival is assessed under a framework designed to answer one central question. How dangerous could this person become if given opportunity? Not how dangerous they were in the past. Not how remorseful they appear. Not what sentence they are serving. Potential is the metric. This is where Belmarsh separates itself from most prisons in Britain. In standard facilities, classification determines privilege levels. At Belmarsh, classification determines containment intensity. It decides whether an inmate will experience relative routine or near total isolation. The system divides inmates into categories that rarely align neatly with legal definitions. Terror-related suspects may be held alongside violent offenders. High-profile defendants awaiting trial may face stricter conditions than convicted prisoners serving life sentences elsewhere. The logic is not moral. It is preventative. Belmarsh was designed around the assumption that order must be enforced before disorder appears. That waiting for violence is failure. That controlling communication is as important as controlling movement. Once classified, inmates are assigned to wings that reflect both security needs and intelligence assessments. These wings are not static communities. Transfers happen frequently and often without explanation. One day, an inmate may be surrounded by others. The next, they may find themselves alone. This instability is deliberate. Predictability allows networks to form. Networks allow influence. Influence threatens control. Inside Belmarsh, social structures are constantly disrupted. Cellmates change. Exercise groups rotate. Work opportunities are limited and closely monitored. Even informal hierarchies struggle to survive under constant fragmentation. For many inmates, this becomes one of the most psychologically draining aspects of confinement. Humans are wired to seek stability. Routine creates meaning. Familiar faces reduce anxiety. Belmarsh removes these anchors systematically. The prison's approach to control extends beyond physical space and into time itself. Days are broken into rigid segments. Movement is scheduled precisely. Delays are common, but explanations are rare. An inmate may be told they will leave their cell at a certain time, only to wait hours without knowing why. This uncertainty erodes expectation. When expectations disappear, resistance weakens. Psychological experts have long noted that unpredictability can be more destabilizing than harsh conditions. Belmarsh applies this principle quietly. There are no public punishments, no dramatic displays of force. Control is exerted through silence, waiting, and denial of clarity. Even communication is treated as a security risk. Phone calls are monitored. Letters are screened. Visits are limited and heavily supervised. Conversations with legal counsel are protected by law, but even these interactions occur under the awareness that movement and scheduling remain under institutional control. For inmates accused of terrorism or organized crime, restrictions are even tighter. Associations are scrutinized. Language use may be flagged. Reading materials can be restricted if deemed to pose ideological or operational risk. This level of surveillance changes behavior. Inmates become cautious with words. Silence becomes safer than expression. Over time, many stop speaking unless necessary. The result is a prison environment where control is internalized. Unlike violent institutions where obedience is enforced through fear of physical harm, Belmarsh encourages self-regulation. Inmates learn quickly that compliance leads to fewer complications, not comfort, but predictability. Resistance, even passive resistance, invites scrutiny. This creates a paradox. On the surface, Belmarsh appears calm. There are fewer riots than in lower security prisons. Violence is less visible, but beneath that calm lies constant tension. Anger has nowhere to go. Frustration accumulates without release. Mental health professionals working with high-security inmates often describe this as contained volatility. Emotion is suppressed, not resolved. Pressure builds silently. For inmates with pre-existing mental health conditions, this environment can be devastating. Isolation intensifies symptoms. Depression deepens. Anxiety becomes chronic. Paranoia can be reinforced rather than alleviated by constant surveillance. In some cases, the prison's structure mirrors the internal fears of the inmates themselves. Belmarsh does provide mental health services. Psychiatrists and counselors are present, but treatment occurs within the same system that creates distress. Therapy sessions are limited by security protocols. Trust is difficult to establish when privacy is scarce. For some inmates, psychological deterioration becomes inevitable. And yet, from an administrative perspective, the system works. Escapes are virtually non-existent. Organized disruption is rare. External coordination is tightly controlled. Belmarsh fulfills its primary mandate, preventing catastrophic failure. This success reinforces the model. Over time, the prison becomes not just a facility, but a proof of concept. A demonstration that extreme containment can be achieved without overt brutality. That control can be exercised quietly, legally, and continuously. This has broader implications. Belmarsh reflects a shift in modern incarceration philosophy, away from punishment as spectacle and toward punishment as risk management. The goal is not to make inmates suffer visibly, but to neutralize them completely. Neutralization is subtle. It happens when initiative disappears, when identity erodes, when the outside world feels unreal. Many inmates report a strange sensation after prolonged confinement. The sense that life beyond the prison walls has become hypothetical. Memories fade. Relationships weaken. News from the outside feels distant, almost fictional. This disconnection serves the system. An inmate who no longer imagines life beyond custody is easier to manage. Hope can be dangerous. It fuels resistance. Belmarsh does not eliminate hope overtly. It lets it wither. Staff are trained to maintain professional distance. Friendly interactions are discouraged. Familiarity is treated as vulnerability. Officers rotate assignments to prevent bonds from forming. This protects staff, but it also reinforces emotional isolation for inmates. Over years, the environment shapes everyone inside it. Officers develop rigid routines. Emotional detachment becomes normalized. Stress is internalized. The prison culture rewards control, not connection. Inmates adapt in different ways. Some withdraw completely. Some become hyper-compliant. Some internalize anger that never finds release. A small number attempt to manipulate the system, but the system is designed to anticipate manipulation. Every rule has contingencies. Every privilege has conditions. Every exception is documented. Belmarsh does not rely on trust. Belmarsh Prison is often described in terms of what it prevents: escapes, communication, coordination, disorder. But to understand its true impact, you have to look at what it creates. Inside Belmarsh, life is not defined by violence or chaos. It is defined by routine so rigid it becomes oppressive, and isolation so normalized it stops being questioned. For most inmates, the day begins the same way, without choice. Lights come on at a fixed hour. Doors unlock or remain sealed depending on classification. Breakfast is issued, not shared. Even the act of eating reinforces separation. Meals are eaten alone or in silence, under supervision, within strict time limits. This repetition is not accidental. It is foundational. Routine is one of the most powerful tools of institutional control. When every action is scheduled, autonomy disappears. Decisions shrink. Life becomes a series of permissions granted or denied by others. For inmates arriving from lower security prisons, this transition can be shocking. In other facilities, there may be informal social life, shared meals, conversations in common areas, moments of unsupervised interaction. At Belmarsh, such moments are rare and tightly controlled. Association periods, when inmates are allowed out of their cells, are limited. Even then, movement is monitored. Conversations are overheard. Proximity is regulated. The environment discourages spontaneity. Over time, inmates adapt by withdrawing inward. Many learn to limit speech. Silence becomes protection. Speaking too much draws attention. Drawing attention invites scrutiny. Scrutiny can lead to restrictions. This gradual silencing has consequences. Humans are social by nature. When interaction is reduced to necessity, emotional expression atrophies. Inmates report feeling emotionally numb after prolonged confinement. Anger, sadness, even joy become muted. Isolation is not always total, but it is persistent. Even inmates who share cells experience a form of loneliness. Cellmates change frequently. Bonds are discouraged. Trust is risky. Everyone knows transfers can happen overnight, without explanation. Friendship becomes temporary. Attachment becomes dangerous. Exercise periods are similarly controlled. Outdoor yards exist, but they are enclosed and monitored. The sky is visible, but freedom feels distant. For some inmates, these brief moments outdoors become the highlight of the day. For others, they serve as reminders of what has been lost. Physical activity helps maintain the body, but it does little to relieve psychological strain when movement is limited and monitored. Work opportunities inside Belmarsh are scarce. Where work exists, it is basic and repetitive. Purpose is not a priority. Security is. Education programs exist, but participation depends on classification and behavior. For high-risk inmates, access may be restricted. Even when available, learning occurs within the same controlled environment, limiting its rehabilitative potential. This creates a prison culture where time becomes the primary enemy. Without meaningful goals, days blur together. Weeks feel indistinguishable. Months pass without milestones. The future becomes abstract. Inmates describe a sensation of existing in suspended animation, alive but not living. Mental health professionals recognize this state as deeply harmful. Long-term isolation and lack of stimulation can lead to depression, anxiety, memory problems, and emotional instability. For some, it triggers or worsens psychosis. Belmarsh does not ignore mental health, but its structure limits intervention. Psychiatric care is provided, but access is constrained by security priorities. Appointments may be delayed. Sessions may be brief. Continuity is difficult when inmates are moved frequently. Medication becomes the primary tool of management. For some inmates, medication helps stabilize mood and reduce distress. For others, it becomes another form of control, sedating rather than healing. The line between treatment and containment blurs. Self-harm incidents occur, though they are rarely publicized. Isolation increases risk. The prison responds with observation protocols, constant checks, and further restrictions, measures that protect life but can deepen psychological distress. This creates a cycle. Distress leads to restriction. Restriction increases distress. The system responds with more control. Breaking that cycle is difficult within a framework built around risk aversion. For inmates accused of terrorism or national security offenses, life is even more restricted. Contact with others may be limited to prevent ideological influence. Reading materials are scrutinized. Religious practices are monitored closely, not to suppress belief, but to detect radicalization. This scrutiny affects not only extremists, but anyone perceived as vulnerable to influence. The result is an environment where belief itself becomes suspect. Even ordinary behaviors, writing extensively, exercising intensely, speaking passionately, can be misinterpreted. Inmates learn to moderate not just actions, but thoughts expressed aloud. Over time, this internal censorship reshapes identity. Many inmates describe feeling reduced to a case file, a number, a risk category. Their past, their personality, their complexity fade behind assessments and reports. This dehumanization is rarely explicit. Officers do not insult inmates. Abuse is not systemic. Instead, humanity is eroded through procedural distance. Officers interact professionally, efficiently, impersonally. Kindness exists, but it is cautious. Compassion is constrained by policy. From the staff perspective, this distance is necessary. Emotional involvement can compromise safety. Familiarity can be exploited. Detachment becomes self-protection. But detachment has a cost. Over time, staff report emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and burnout. The same routines that suppress inmate autonomy also suppress staff empathy. Everyone inside the prison is shaped by the environment. Public imagination often pictures high-security prisons as violent places filled with constant threat. Belmarsh is different. Its danger is quieter. The real struggle is internal. Inmates fight boredom. They fight despair. They fight the slow erosion of self. Some cope by creating strict personal routines, exercise, reading, writing. Others retreat into sleep. Some cling to legal battles as their only source of purpose. A few adapt so completely that they become model prisoners, complying without resistance. From the system's perspective, this is success. But compliance is not the same as rehabilitation. Rehabilitation requires engagement, reflection, growth. Belmarsh prioritizes stability and security. Growth is secondary, if it is considered at all. This raises uncomfortable questions. What happens to inmates who spend years in this environment and are then released or transferred? How does prolonged containment affect their ability to function in less restrictive settings? Does extreme control prepare people for freedom, or does it make freedom overwhelming? Former inmates often describe difficulty adjusting. Ordinary choices feel stressful. Crowds feel threatening. Silence feels unfamiliar. The world outside moves too fast. Belmarsh does not teach reintegration. It teaches endurance. And endurance, once learned, can be hard to unlearn. The prison's defenders argue that this is unavoidable, that the individuals housed there are not typical offenders, that extraordinary risks require extraordinary measures. Belmarsh Prison is often described as secure, but security, inside this prison, is not just physical. It is psychological. It is bureaucratic. And most importantly, it is invisible. The most powerful systems inside Belmarsh are the ones inmates rarely see. Surveillance begins long before an inmate enters a cell. From the moment someone is flagged as a potential Belmarsh transfer, information begins accumulating. Intelligence reports, behavioral histories, legal classifications, and internal risk assessments follow them like a shadow. By the time an inmate arrives, the prison already has a narrative about who that person is. That narrative matters more than the individual's own account. Belmarsh operates on the principle that information equals control. Cameras line corridors, yards, and communal spaces. Control rooms monitor feeds continuously. Officers receive briefings not only on security risks, but on psychological indicators, changes in behavior, tone, routine, or mood. Nothing is considered trivial. A shift in sleep patterns, a refusal to attend association, an increase in letter writing, a sudden withdrawal from conversation. All of these can be interpreted as warning signs. This level of monitoring creates an environment where inmates are never fully alone, even when physically isolated. Awareness of constant observation reshapes behavior. People stop acting spontaneously. They begin to perform compliance. Over time, the prison no longer needs to intervene frequently. Surveillance does the work. Inmates learn that resistance is visible, documented, and consequential. Punishment does not have to be immediate or dramatic. It can arrive later, quietly, through revoked privileges, delayed movement, or reclassification. This delayed response is deliberate. Immediate punishment invites confrontation. Delayed consequences create anxiety. Anxiety creates self-policing. Belmarsh excels at this form of control. The prison's disciplinary system rarely relies on physical force. Instead, it uses procedural pressure. A report filed, a review scheduled, a privilege suspended, pending assessment. Each step is legal. Each step is documented. Each step feels unavoidable. For inmates, challenging these decisions is difficult. Appeals exist, but they are slow. The burden of proof rests with the prisoner. And even when successful, the outcome may change little. A win on paper does not always translate into change on the wing. This creates a sense of futility. When rules are flexible enough to adapt to any situation, resistance loses meaning. Power inside Belmarsh is decentralized. No single officer controls an inmate's fate. Decisions are spread across committees, assessments, and reports. This diffusion of responsibility protects staff and the institution. It also makes power harder to confront. Inmates cannot argue with the system. They can only endure it. Staff are trained within this framework. Officers learn to rely on procedure rather than discretion. Following protocol is not just encouraged. It is essential for career survival. Deviating from procedure exposes staff to risk, scrutiny, and blame. This creates a culture where rules replace judgment. Officers may recognize distress or unfairness, but their ability to intervene is limited. Compassion becomes constrained by policy. Even small acts of kindness can be interpreted as security risks. Over time, this affects staff psychology. Many officers describe emotional detachment as necessary. Caring too much makes the job unbearable. Distance becomes protection, but emotional distance also reinforces the system's power. When everyone behaves according to procedure, humanity becomes secondary. Belmarsh's surveillance culture extends beyond cameras and reports. It shapes relationships. Inmates know they are watched. They also know they are watched by people who are themselves watched. Officers are monitored by supervisors. Supervisors answer to administrators. Administrators answer to oversight bodies. Everyone is accountable upward. This vertical pressure discourages deviation at every level. As a result, the prison becomes remarkably stable. Incidents are managed quickly. Disorder is rare. On paper, Belmarsh is a success. But stability comes at a cost. The constant awareness of being observed creates psychological strain. Inmates report feeling unable to relax, even alone in their cells. The sense of privacy erodes. Thoughts feel exposed, even when they are not. This hyperawareness can lead to paranoia, especially among inmates already predisposed to it. For others, it creates emotional numbness. When expression feels risky, suppression feels safer. Surveillance reshapes identity. People become cautious versions of themselves. Humor fades. Creativity shrinks. Personality flattens. The system does not demand obedience through fear of violence. It achieves obedience by making deviation exhausting. Every action must be considered. Every word weighed. Every gesture monitored. In this environment, power does not announce itself. It hums quietly in the background. Belmarsh's role in national security intensifies this dynamic. When a prison is framed as a frontline defense against terrorism or organized crime, extraordinary measures become normalized. Security overrides comfort. Risk overrides fairness. Prevention overrides rehabilitation. This logic is rarely questioned internally. It is embedded in policy, training, and culture. Critics argue that this creates a slippery slope, that when risk is undefined, control can expand endlessly, that extraordinary measures become ordinary. Supporters argue that modern threats require modern responses, that failure is unacceptable, that even one escape or coordinated attack would justify years of strict control. This tension defines Belmarsh's existence. It is not a prison designed for moral clarity. It is a prison designed for risk elimination. For inmates, this means living under a system that prioritizes what might happen over what has happened. Suspicion replaces certainty. Potential replaces proof. This can be especially destabilizing for inmates held without conviction or under extended pretrial detention. They experience the same restrictions as convicted prisoners without the psychological anchor of a sentence length. Time becomes indefinite. Justice feels abstract. Some inmates respond by becoming hypercompliant. Others withdraw completely. A few attempt to challenge the system through legal channels, but progress is slow and uncertain. The prison does not need to silence dissent. The environment discourages it naturally. Even among staff, dissent is rare. Questioning security decisions can be interpreted as weakness or naivety. The culture rewards vigilance, not reflection. This reinforces institutional momentum. Once a system like Belmarsh is built, it sustains itself. Procedures justify themselves through outcomes. Stability becomes proof of correctness. But stability is not the same as justice. The invisible line between safety and control is crossed quietly, incrementally. Each decision seems reasonable in isolation. Together, they create an environment where total control feels normal. Belmarsh does not appear cruel. That is its most dangerous quality. It does not need to be. Its power lies in normalization, making extreme containment feel like common sense. For the men inside, this means living under constant observation without overt oppression. It means adapting to a world where autonomy is unnecessary and agency is irrelevant. It means existing in a system that does not hate you, does not fear you personally. Belmarsh Prison does not end at its gates. For many who pass through it, Belmarsh follows them long after they leave its walls. Whether they are transferred to another prison, released into the public, or held indefinitely within the system. Its impact is not confined to cells and corridors. It echoes in courtrooms, mental health systems, families, and public debate. To understand the true cost of Belmarsh, you have to look beyond daily routines and security protocols. You have to examine what prolonged extreme containment does to people and what it means for a society that chooses this form of control. For inmates who eventually leave Belmarsh, the transition is rarely simple. Some are transferred to lower security prisons after years of intense restriction. On paper, this looks like progress. In reality, it can feel like disorientation. The habits formed in Belmarsh, silence, hypervigilance, emotional suppression, do not disappear overnight. In lower security environments, these adaptations become liabilities. Former Belmarsh inmates often struggle with basic social interaction. Casual conversation feels threatening. Noise feels overwhelming. Choice feels unfamiliar. The constant monitoring they lived under is gone, but the internal sense of being watched remains. This is a common feature of long-term high-security confinement. The prison becomes internalized. Psychologists describe this as institutionalization. The rules of the institution replace personal judgment. When those rules disappear, anxiety increases rather than decreases. Freedom does not feel liberating, it feels unsafe. For some, this manifests as withdrawal. For others, as aggression. Emotional regulation becomes difficult. Trust is slow to return, if it returns at all. Reintegration programs exist, but they are often insufficient to address years of psychological conditioning. Belmarsh was never designed to prepare people for release. It was designed to neutralize risk. That neutralization does not reverse itself. For inmates released directly into the community, rare, but not unheard of, the challenges multiply. Social services may be unprepared. Families may have changed beyond recognition. Public stigma follows those associated with Belmarsh, regardless of conviction status. Employment is difficult. Relationships are strained. Mental health support is often fragmented. In these cases, the question becomes unavoidable. Has the prison made society safer, or has it simply displaced risk into another form? Supporters argue that Belmarsh does exactly what it is supposed to do. It contains individuals deemed too dangerous to manage elsewhere. It prevents escapes. It disrupts networks. It buys time. Critics counter that containment without rehabilitation creates long-term instability. That releasing psychologically damaged individuals into society, without adequate support, may create new risks rather than eliminate old ones. This debate extends beyond individual cases. It touches on the philosophy of modern incarceration itself. Belmarsh represents a model increasingly seen across democratic states: preventive detention, risk-based control, and security-first logic. In this model, the question is no longer what did you do, but what might you do? That shift has profound implications. Risk is inherently subjective. It is shaped by intelligence assessments, predictive models, and institutional bias. When risk becomes the primary justification for confinement, legal certainty weakens. Sentences lose meaning. Detention becomes open-ended. For inmates held for extended periods without conviction or under restrictive pretrial conditions, this uncertainty can be devastating. The absence of a clear endpoint erodes hope. Without hope, mental health deteriorates rapidly. Belmarsh has become a symbol in this broader conversation, not just in Britain, but internationally. Human rights organizations have raised concerns about prolonged isolation, psychological harm, and the normalization of extreme control. Legal scholars question whether existing safeguards are sufficient when national security is invoked. Government officials respond by emphasizing necessity. They point to the absence of major incidents, the prevention of escapes, and the containment of dangerous individuals as evidence of success. Both sides present compelling arguments. But inside Belmarsh, the debate is abstract. For the men living there, policy arguments do not change daily reality. What matters is the lived experience, the isolation, the surveillance, the waiting. Families of inmates feel the impact as well. Visits are limited and tightly controlled. Physical contact is restricted. Conversations are monitored. Relationships strain under the weight of distance and uncertainty. Children grow up with absent parents whose absence is not only physical, but emotional. Partners struggle to maintain connection through brief, supervised encounters. Over time, many relationships fade. This isolation extends punishment beyond the individual inmate. It affects entire social networks. Staff, too, carry the burden. Working in an environment like Belmarsh reshapes perception. Officers become accustomed to extreme measures. What once felt extraordinary becomes routine. Over time, this normalization can dull sensitivity to suffering. Many officers report stress-related health issues, emotional fatigue, and difficulty disconnecting from work. The same systems that contain inmates also constrain staff. Everyone operates under constant scrutiny. Turnover is high. Experience is lost. Institutional knowledge becomes procedural rather than personal. This raises another question rarely asked publicly. Who is this system sustainable for? Belmarsh functions because it must. But its cost, psychological, social, ethical, is ongoing. As global security concerns evolve, pressure increases to expand facilities like Belmarsh, not reduce them. Risk-based detention appeals to policymakers because it promises certainty in an uncertain world. But certainty achieved through extreme control carries consequences. It reshapes how justice is defined. It shifts focus from accountability to prediction. It prioritizes prevention over proportionality. Belmarsh exists at the intersection of these forces. It is not an aberration. It is a prototype. What happens inside its walls offers a glimpse into the future of incarceration, one where technology, surveillance, and risk assessment replace older models of punishment and reform. Whether that future is acceptable remains an open question. For now, Belmarsh continues to operate largely out of public view. Headlines surface occasionally. Controversies flare and fade. The institution persists. For those inside, time continues to pass slowly. For those who leave, the imprint remains. Belmarsh does not need to be remembered consciously to shape behavior. Its influence is subtle, internal, lasting, and that may be its greatest power. Not the walls, not the cameras, not the locks, but the way it teaches people, inside and outside, that absolute control can be normalized, justified, and sustained without visible cruelty. Whether that lesson makes society safer, or simply more accustomed to fear, may be the most important question Belmarsh leaves unanswered. Belmarsh Prison is not just a prison you can point to on a map. It is an idea made physical, an idea about fear, about control, about how far a modern society is willing to go to feel safe. Throughout this documentary, we have moved through steel corridors and locked wings, through routines designed to erase unpredictability, through systems that value prevention over redemption. And yet, the most unsettling truth about Belmarsh is not what happens inside its walls. It is how normal it has become. Belmarsh does not rely on spectacle. There are no public punishments, no visible brutality meant to shock the conscience. Instead, it operates quietly, through procedures, assessments, classifications, and reports. Everything is legal. Everything is documented. Everything is justified. And that is precisely why it matters. Because when extreme control is clean, bureaucratic, and orderly, it becomes easier to accept. When fear is managed through policy instead of force, it stops looking like fear at all. It starts to look like responsibility. Belmarsh tells us that danger can be managed by isolation. That risk can be neutralized by surveillance. That uncertainty can be solved by control. But it also tells us something else. It shows us what happens when people are reduced to profiles instead of personalities. When time becomes a tool of punishment rather than a measure of justice. When security becomes the overriding value, and everything else, rehabilitation, dignity, hope, becomes negotiable. For the men held inside, Belmarsh is not a debate. It is daily life. For their families, it is distance, silence, and waiting. For staff, it is vigilance, routine, and emotional restraint. For the public, it is largely invisible, until a headline reminds us it exists. And maybe that invisibility is the point. Belmarsh operates best when it is not questioned, when its necessity is assumed, when its existence feels inevitable. But no prison is inevitable. No system is neutral. Every design choice reflects values. Belmarsh reflects a choice to prioritize absolute security over uncertainty, to accept psychological damage as collateral, to believe that some risks are too great to tolerate, even if the cost is long-term human harm. Whether that choice is justified is not something this documentary can decide for you. What it can do is make one thing clear. Belmarsh is not an exception. It is a warning. A warning about how easily extraordinary measures become routine, about how fear reshapes justice, about how containment can replace understanding. Because the true legacy of a prison like Belmarsh will not be measured only by who it held or what it prevented. It will be measured by what it taught us to accept. And once a society accepts that total control is reasonable, that isolation is humane, that silence is safety, the question is no longer what happens inside the prison. The question is how far that logic travels beyond its walls. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.